The airport was a symphony of motion. Travelers hurrying to their gates, flight announcements echoing through the intercom, and the rhythmic clatter of rolling suitcases across the polished tile floor. Among the sea of passengers, one figure stood out. He moved with a quiet confidence, a presence that commanded attention without a single word. Clad in his signature rugged style, the man was none other than Clint Eastwood, a living legend, an icon whose name carried a weight of respect and admiration across generations. Today, he wasn't just another passenger. He was on his way to a high-profile event, and his safe and timely arrival was of utmost importance. But Clint Eastwood was not traveling alone. Walking beside him was his escort, a seasoned bodyguard whose very demeanor exuded professionalism. His sharp eyes scanned the environment constantly, assessing potential threats, calculating escape routes, and ensuring that his client remained undisturbed. This wasn't just a routine journey. It was a meticulously planned operation, and the bodyguard's job was to execute it flawlessly. As they approached the check-in counter, he remained on high alert, his instincts finely tuned to any sign of trouble. For most travelers, check-in was a mundane process, a simple exchange of identification, a few security questions, and a boarding pass handed over with a polite smile. But for high-profile figures like Eastwood, the process was often more complicated. VIP treatment was expected, but with that came scrutiny, heightened security protocols, and occasionally uninformed staff who didn't recognize the importance of their passengers. Today would prove to be one such day, as an unsuspecting airline employee prepared to make a decision that would soon turn into a regrettable mistake. The bodyguard was no stranger to situations like these. Years of experience had prepared him for everything from overzealous fans to potential security threats. He had worked with celebrities, politicians, and high-profile executives, each with their own set of risks and challenges. But protecting Clint Eastwood carried a different kind of weight. This wasn't just a client. This was a man whose face was synonymous with power, authority, and cinematic history. Ensuring his safety wasn't just a job, it was a responsibility that demanded perfection. From the moment they stepped into the airport, the bodyguard was fully engaged. He walked with an air of authority, subtly positioning himself between Eastwood and any potential interference. His eyes never stopped moving, noting every detail, the positioning of security cameras, the proximity of other travelers, the nearest exits. In his world, preparedness was everything. A split-second delay could mean the difference between order and chaos, and he prided himself on never allowing the latter to unfold. But trouble had a way of presenting itself in unexpected ways. Sometimes, it came in the form of an aggressive paparazzo desperate for an exclusive photo. Other times, it was an overenthusiastic fan crossing the boundaries of personal space. Today, however, the challenge would come not from the outside world, but from the very people who were supposed to facilitate a smooth journey, the airline staff. The airline's objection as Eastwood and his escort approached the check-in counter. An airline employee looked up, their expression shifting from routine politeness to measured skepticism. The presence of the bodyguard, combined with the aura of quiet dominance that Eastwood naturally carried, seemed to put the staff member on edge. Perhaps it was the casual, effortless charisma of the Hollywood legend. Perhaps it was the protective stance of the bodyguard that suggested an air of exclusivity. Whatever the reason, the employee's next words would set the stage for an unnecessary confrontation. "Excuse me, sir," they said, their tone firm but professional. "I'm sorry, but you can't bring him through this way." The bodyguard's expression remained unreadable. "He's Clint Eastwood," he stated calmly. "We have clearance." The employee shook their head, clearly unmoved. "Rules are rules," they said. "He needs to go through regular procedures like everyone else." The tension in the air thickened. Eastwood, ever the composed figure, remained silent, watching the exchange with the same steely gaze that had made him famous. The bodyguard, however, wasn't about to let bureaucracy stand in the way of his mission. He had dealt with obstacles before, but this was different. This wasn't a security risk, nor was it a matter of protocol. It was a failure to recognize the exceptional circumstances at play. And if there was one thing the bodyguard knew, it was that challenging Clint Eastwood directly or indirectly was never a good idea. Big mistake. Eastwood's response, the airline employee, unaware of the storm they were about to provoke, held their ground. They had no idea that they were moments away from experiencing firsthand the presence and power of Clint Eastwood's legendary persona. It was in that moment that Eastwood finally spoke, his voice calm yet commanding. "Do you feel lucky?" The words, delivered in the same cool and calculated manner that had made his on-screen characters so iconic, sent a wave of silence through the surrounding area. It was a phrase loaded with history, a line from one of his most famous films, Dirty Harry. And yet, spoken in real life, in a situation of conflict, it carried an even heavier weight. The employee's face paled. For a brief moment, their confidence wavered. Was he joking? Was this some kind of test? The bodyguard, sensing the shift in atmosphere, decided to push forward. "I suggest you check again," he said, his tone still measured but firm. Without breaking eye contact, he reached into his coat and pulled out a set of credentials, official documentation that proved beyond a doubt that Eastwood was entitled to VIP treatment. The employee hesitated, glancing at the credentials, then back at Eastwood, whose piercing gaze remained unbroken. Intervention from higher authorities. What happened next was inevitable. Calls were made. Higher-ups were summoned. Within minutes, the situation had escalated beyond the control of the employee, who now stood to the side, clearly regretting their earlier stance. Senior management arrived, reviewed the documentation, and quickly realized the error. Not only was Clint Eastwood granted the VIP access he was entitled to, but the process was expedited. Apologies were issued, though none were explicitly acknowledged by Eastwood, who simply gave a knowing smirk as he moved forward. The bodyguard, satisfied that order had been restored, resumed his watchful stance beside him. Apology and final outcome. As they made their way toward the boarding gate, the once defiant employee stood silently, now understanding the gravity of their mistake. The entire situation had been avoidable, but it had become yet another moment that added to the legend of Clint Eastwood. He hadn't needed to argue, threaten, or demand. One line, one single, powerful sentence had been enough to shift the entire course of events in his favor. As they stepped onto the plane, Eastwood turned to his bodyguard, his expression betraying just the slightest hint of amusement. "Some folks just don't know who they're dealing with." The bodyguard chuckled softly. "No, sir, they do not." And with that, they boarded, leaving behind an airport full of employees who would forever have a story to tell, the day they tried to stop Clint Eastwood, and learned firsthand why that was a very, very big mistake.